Well, there isn't any way that Michigan presidential primaries work. Each time 4 years comes up and it's time for the two parties to allocate their delegates to the national conventions on each side, each time Michigan discovers again that the previous system didn't work and has broken down and is now prohibited by court decisions or changes in the rules of the national parties. And so each time we sort of start over and we cobble together a one-time fix which then collapses before the next 4 years rolls around. So you have to really, you can talk about what we've done in the past, sort of like a series of battles or maybe bar fights. You know, they aren't like a tradition exactly. They don't really fit together into a theme. And we can talk about the situation for this year's bar fight, but really we don't have what you would call continuity. So maybe I'll start with I'll just touch on these. 1972, and so the Republicans overtly encouraged all of their people to cross over and support George Wallace, who was a segregationist and a right-winger and corrupt. And in 76, we had a relatively sensible process. So in 1980, I mean, John Anderson, anyway, this big mess. 84, in 88, the Democrats and the Republicans each chose a new mistake. So that gets us to 92, and the law was quickly repealed after that, because in 1996, there wasn't much Democratic screwing around. But in 2000, John Engler, who was extremely unpopular, and asbestos firewall, I don't know why. So that gets us to 2004, or 2008, was to be given only to the two political parties. Then a lawsuit was brought with my support. So now we get to 2012. On the statute books, we have a requirement for a presidential primary, but it has no party declaration. Certainly the Democrats will not participate in a presidential primary at this point because Democratic National Party rules forbid it, and because Obama will run for re-election essentially unopposed in the Democratic process. Okay, primary, caucus, whatever it is. So the Republicans are left in a situation that there's essentially no law. The primary will be held at a time that's not convenient to them. Under National Republican Party rules, they're not allowed to hold a primary at the date that's currently specified by state law. There's no party declaration requirement. And there's no bar to Democrats and independents crossing over and screwing around. And at this point, especially after the experience with Democrats voting in large numbers for Rick Snyder, I'd have to say the Democrats really have the drill down. We understand about crossing over and screwing with the Republicans. So if you ask what do we usually do, I'd say we don't usually do anything in particular. We do different things every time, and none of them really have worked very well. I've been trying to figure out what they're going to do, and I've been trying to get newspaper reporters interested in this question. And so all the reporters I know, I've been egging them on to push the Republicans to try to explain how they're going to get themselves out of this corner they've been painted into. They've basically been painting a floor, and they're now in the corner of the room, and there's wet paint all around them. And there they are, you know, with their bucket of paint and about 4 square feet in which they're kneeling. And the paint's not going to be dry for 12 hours. I mean, it's a long metaphor. Not very interesting. But I've been trying to figure out how they're going to do this. So here's what they've painted. In the first place, the current law doesn't provide for party declaration, doesn't keep Democrats from raiding, and because the Democrats have no primary, and because the Democrats will not permit Obama's name to be printed on ballots, which under federal rulings they have the ability to prevent, as a result of all that, there's certainly a danger of Democratic crossover to screw around in the Republican primary. And with the Republican field so weak, and Democrats so angry, a Democratic crossover is almost inevitable, which could easily be malicious. In other words, it could be aimed at nominating Ron Paul or Michelle Bachmann or some other, hell, Don Trump would be the perfect one for the day. So, they can't go with current law, even though the current law is there. Now, the Republicans have enough majority in the two houses of the legislature, and of course they control the governorship, that they can really push through any changes they want. So they can change state law without Democratic help. But how does that really help them? The next thing that they would think about would be relying on the precinct delegates elected in 2010 to vote at county conventions and then elect delegates to a state convention. So in other words, there'd be no public process at all. It'd be entirely on the basis of conventions held at the county and state level based on precinct delegates. But the problem was the Tea Party took probably almost a majority of slots in Republican precinct delegate contests all over the state, and they control many of the county parties, and they're far better organized and more numerous than the mainstream Republicans. As a result of that, if the Republicans try to rely on that process, they're likely to be back to the same problem, well, a different problem. Instead of the Democrats crossing over and being malicious, you'll have the Tea Party people taking things over and being crazy. Well, the mainstream Republicans want to deliver the state probably to Mitt Romney or somebody sensible in the middle. And they certainly are not excited about the Tea Party fanatics and their funny hats. So they're not going to go with a process like that. The third possibility would be to hold Iowa-style caucuses at scattered locations around the state. The problem is that Michigan might actually have a turnout of, say, 200,000 or 300,000 people. To hold an election in which 200,000 or 300,000 people show up at specific locations, park, walk into a facility, apply for ballots or whatever, wait until it's called, and then cast their votes, requires a huge organization. In Iowa, it requires a huge organization, and Iowa has been doing it for 50 years and is a much smaller state. Michigan has not ever done this. Michigan Republican Party has no experience with this kind of thing. It's a larger state, and there is no infrastructure. There's no planning in place. There are no rules. To do it the first time is almost certain to invite catastrophe. I mean, you'd end up with polling places that didn't have proper facilities, that there was no place to park, that somebody took over control of the caucus and refused to allow some group of people to vote in it. There'd be court challenges. There'd just be a mess. And you wouldn't be able to work these things out until the day, and then you'd have the news media all over you. Wherever you had a problem, you'd have media people interviewing the angry 100 people in line who can't vote and are prevented from ever voting, let's say. Anyway, I just can't believe that the Republicans will attempt an Iowa-style caucus. So, as far as I can tell, other than drawing names out of a hat, or consulting a Ouija board, or, I don't know, sacrificing virgins to the gods and trying to determine the gods' will, I guess the only process that's left is that the Republicans will push through the legislature a new set of bills, a new set of statutes, creating a brand new process in Michigan and requiring party declaration and basically prohibiting any person from voting in the Republican primary who doesn't declare themselves to be a Republican Party adherent. Now, that could be done, I guess, if the legislature were under the control of the state party, which it's not. I suppose it'll have to be done, and so the state party will have to find some way to line all these Republicans up who have no idea that they're going to have to vote for this, to vote for an extremely unpopular measure and push it through without any Democratic votes, or with very few Democratic votes. The reason it's unpopular is that Michigan has never had party registration. We've occasionally had, not registration, but a process in which you declare a party for the purpose of presidential primary only. In other words, our other primaries, August primaries for state offices, have not in recent memory, not in almost 100 years, required you declare yourself a member of a political party. So Michigan's voters are simply unfamiliar with what is common in other states, which is you have to be a member of the political party in order to vote in their primary. Well, in Michigan, you just don't. And voters here believe that they have this right to vote in either party without saying which party they're a member of. And there are hundreds of thousands of people who get angry whenever they're forced to disclose which party they are, and they refuse to participate in the process. But they write letters to the editor, and they show up at meetings, and they yell, and they demand to know where their constitutional right to such and such is, and they just generally make a big fuss. As a result of this, the city, township, and county clerks hate this idea. They've essentially unanimously agreed that they oppose party declaration because it ticks off all the voters that they have to deal with all the time. And it just causes scenes at the polling places. It causes scenes when they're trying to issue absentee ballots. You end up calling the police to some polling places. You end up just with arguments at township board meetings. Nobody wants to get involved in this.